Hello and welcome into BTN's Take 10 podcast. This is Alex Roux, BTN, and we're back at it with another episode following a historic weekend in the Big Ten with one of the biggest upsets we've seen really in the last 40 years or so, with Illinois knocking off number 6 Wisconsin. And just since that was such a big event, major event in college football, such a big upset, figured I'd try and use some connections I have to that campus, being an alum of that university, and try and get a guest that would provide a unique perspective on that experience. So the guest for this episode is former Illinois wide receiver Mikey Dudek. For those who have watched Big Ten football this decade, probably remember Mikey Dudek for, first off, his outstanding freshman season in Illinois as one of the best wide receivers in the country that year in 2014, and then for his tough luck in the injury department following that season. So he had 3 season-ending injuries through his final season last year in 2018, and is now retired from football. But he was at the game on Saturday when Illinois upset Wisconsin, was on the field celebrating with his former teammates, and he was happy to come on and discuss that experience and also his college experience playing at Illinois, and kind of how he dealt with all the injuries and the adversity that came his way. So I really appreciate Mikey for jumping on and just kind of updating us and letting us behind the curtain a little bit of his life and that wild upset over the Badgers this past weekend. So that's the first 25 minutes or so of the show. After that, we bring in BTN researcher Harold Shelton for his weekly Stat Head segment. And if you're not a regular listener to the show, Harold comes on every week during football and basketball season to go behind the numbers and break down what's going on in Big Ten play, and especially during football season. Look back at the weekend that was in the conference and look ahead and project out what's going to happen or what might happen coming up in this case, week 9 of college football. So first up, Mikey Dudek, followed by Harold Shelton, and we'll toss it over to the former Illinois wide receiver first. It's Take 10 podcast discussion with Mikey Dudek. It starts right now. Very pleased to be joined by former Illinois wide receiver. He's a freshman All-American back in 2014. It's none other than Mikey Dudek. Mikey, how's it going, man?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me. And just off the top, I got to kind of address the elephant in the room, because we connected recently on LinkedIn, and I noticed that you were going by Mike Dudek. You dropped the Y. So tell me, if this is just like a formal thing, or what went into the decision-making process to rebrand a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't know I guess it's a rebrand for me in the work world, or I guess a new brand. So I started working back in January, and my whole life I've been Mikey, always introduced myself as Mikey, and I was like, you know what, it might be time to drop the Y, like you said. So starting in January, once I started working, I introduced myself as Mike now whenever I'm in the work zone, work world. But, outside of that, everyone still calls me Mikey. My parents, brother, all my friends, my girlfriend, they all still call me Mikey. And it's kind of funny, because when I went to Illinois the first time, when I graduated early and went in the spring of 2014, I tried to do the whole Mike thing as well, and then eventually everybody just started calling me Mikey again, and then Mikey just stuck from there. And I'm kind of seeing that similar pattern now, believe it or not, at work, where a couple of my coworkers are referring to me as Mikey. So we'll see how long Mike actually lasts.
Yeah, I feel like you're still Mikey to everyone at BTN and to all your fans. So we'll stick with that for the rest of the podcast. And before we even get into the football stuff, you mentioned your job and kind of your life at work. Fill us in on what you're up to now that football is in the rearview mirror and you're in the working world.
Yeah, so I'm working for a company in Oak Brook. It's a wealth management company called Mariner Wealth Advisors. And right now I am studying to earn my CFP, Certified Financial Planner. And then one day hope to, manage clients the same way that my boss does. So I work under a guy, and he's kind of mentoring me in that aspect of learning how everything goes. And I do a lot of behind the scenes stuff. I'm learning a lot. It's taken a little bit to get used to the whole 9 to 5 thing.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that you're putting that business degree at Illinois to good use, and definitely we can get into some of your personal exploits here in a little bit. But I wanted to circle back to the reason I kind of wanted to have you on this week, and for obvious reasons, it's the big win for Illinois over Wisconsin. Really a program-changing win for a team that you put a lot of work into, and on a campus you spent a lot of time at down in Champaign. And you were there for the win over Wisconsin. I saw some video of you on the field. So just I guess my first thought is, were you there just because it was homecoming, or do you get to a lot of games? What led you to that game in particular?
My girlfriend still goes to school there. She graduates in December. So I was planning on going up to see her, and then, it was homecoming as well, and a lot of my former teammates were going up as well. So it was going to be cool to see everybody. And then on top of that, I was really confident going into this game. I know Wisconsin is a powerhouse year in and year out, but I really thought, we matched up well against them. Believe it or not, I was probably, part of the 1% that actually thought that. But, I was just looking forward to a good Illini football game. And, considering the outcome, I'd say it went pretty well for us.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that belief and confidence, because I'm curious from the player's perspective. I mean, you were in that locker room as recently as last year. And I'll be honest, I did not think that this could happen this week or this past week. I thought maybe, going into this season, Illinois could upset in Iowa or Michigan State. But, after they lost to Eastern Michigan and Nebraska a few weeks ago, I thought the walls might kind of cave in on this season. So just from a player's perspective and what you think might be going through those guys' heads, do you think that a lot of players in that locker room believed going in that they could still win a game and beat a team like Wisconsin?
Yes. I 100%. Just knowing a lot of the guys that are still on that team, the leaders of the team, Reggie Corbin, Jake Hansen, Dele, they would never put their team out on the field when they're not confident. They're, all week preaching to them, just because they're the number 6 team in the country, doesn't mean that we can't go out there and beat them. And then I know the wins haven't came this year like we'd want them to, but there's been flashes with this team. I mean, the third quarter going into the fourth quarter, we whooped Michigan. Now it was just putting the full 60 minutes together, and that's, something we hadn't done in the last, 5-6 years for the Illini. So, I know those guys were confident, just knowing that if they could play their game for 60 minutes, they could, compete with anybody. And Saturday it showed that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big testament to how that team's responded, because you see it sometimes in football where the belief kind of drains out of a program's kind of collective psyche. And like you said, it seems like something clicked at halftime of that Michigan game, and the last 6 quarters of football that have been played have been really, really good, have been top 25 caliber football. And, instead of folding, they kind of have gone the complete opposite way. So I want to know about your kind of viewing experience of the entire game, because I saw a video of you on the field after the game. Take me from the time you arrived near the stadium Saturday morning and throughout. How did you kind of take this game in?
Yeah, so I got there, and I actually showed up a little bit late to the game. I was out tailgating with some buddies, and we were walking in, and they have the TVs in the common area or whatever it's called, and I saw it was already 7-0. I'm like, oh man, not again, But when I was out there, I never saw any quit in our guys, and I never saw Wisconsin start to pull away. And I'm a big believer in momentum in all sports. If the momentum's on your side, then there's not many things that can stop you. And I never felt the momentum shift. It was kind of right in the middle of the entire game until, the 6-minute mark in the fourth quarter when Brandon threw that touchdown pass. Then I knew we were going to go win the game. I knew we were down by 2. And then Tony Adams, coming up with that big interception. Then Dre Brown, the big, 20 or so yard run to set us up for in field goal range. But I was actually standing right underneath the goalpost when James kicked it. And, honestly, it was one of the greater moments in my life.
So did you storm the field with kind of the rest of the fans and whoever else was mingling around down there?
So it's actually when I ran out on the field, before he kicked it, I was talking to my girlfriend and a couple of my friends, And I was like, once he makes this, like, I'm running out there. Like, I don't care. I'm storming the field, thinking that, everybody would follow me. And, the kick went in, and I didn't even think. I just took off running. And I'm running, and the ref is standing at, like, the 15-yard line and turns around and looks at me, and I'm looking at the ref. And it felt like we locked eyes for, like, 2 years. I was like, oh, my gosh. Like, because then I looked around me, and, nobody else was running out there. And I was like, oh, my goodness. Like, am I going to get a penalty, Wisconsin to get one untimed down, and then, who knows what could have happened. But thankfully he didn't throw it, and I was able to celebrate with the guys.
Yeah, it's actually hilarious because if people aren't familiar with the stadium setup, I mean, the student section is like 30 feet off the ground, so it takes a while for them to get down there. You probably, were one of a handful of actual fans that were on the sideline in position to storm the field, and I just love that you had that, like, brief moment of panic that they might call it back, or like something that you did might cause it. But even beyond that, like, I'm just curious from your point of view, was it bittersweet at all, like, to celebrate kind of as a bystander now, as a fan, or did you just feel still like as an extension of that team almost? Because a lot of those guys, were your teammates less than a year ago, and you've been around the program forever. How did you kind of approach it after you've reflected on just the aftermath of the win?
It's really hard to explain. I think bittersweet would be a good way to put it. I'm so happy for those guys, and I know, you talk about building a program, laying the foundation, but, ultimately those guys went out there and won on Saturday. So, I'm as happy as I could be for them. And it's a testament to what, Coach Smith has been preaching from day one. You never turn something around overnight. And I'm not saying the program is turned around off one win. It's something we need to build off of. But it was a pretty surreal moment. And it's honestly, it's super hard to explain. I really, after I ran out on the field, I'm not sure what happened. I was so excited, and my emotions were getting the best of me.
Yeah, so the reason I knew you were on the field and kind of gave me the idea to try and hit you up and get you on today was the video that kind of went viral of you talking to our guy, Isaac Trotter. I think he works for the Illini Inquirer, I believe. Posted a video, and you said, this is what we needed. Now Illinois is back on the come up. And you just mentioned that there's, still work to be done. There's a long way to go. But I do think this was the win that they needed because, like I said before, if you beat a team that maybe is not as high profile as Wisconsin, or say, you win against Eastern Michigan and Nebraska, but you lose against Wisconsin, I don't know if that does enough to instill the belief in the fan base, the collective psyche of the players. I think this win, has that potential. I'm curious to get your thoughts on how it kind of moves the program forward and where you think the program can go from here.
Yeah, no, I agree completely 100% with what you just said. Obviously, Eastern Michigan win is a pat on the back. Nobody really talks about it because it's expected of you. And then Nebraska, that game could have gone either way. Nobody really knew who was going to win that game going into it. But beating a team like Wisconsin, like that says a lot. That is a statement win. I mean, it was all over the country. I couldn't go on Twitter without seeing somebody talking about it. Even now, I'm seeing all these networks putting things out there about Illinois, Coach Smith winning all these Coach of the Week awards. And that's something that you need. You need that statement win to get you over the hump. But again, it goes back to that win. It's cool to talk about, but if you don't build off of it, then it's only cool to talk about it. It didn't really change anything. And I think that's what's most important for this program is, to come out against Purdue and just play like you did against Wisconsin and get a win. Because, if you end up losing to Purdue, getting blown out to Purdue, then, all that talk is all that negative talk is just coming right back to them.
Yeah, it's well said. And you mentioned earlier kind of what Lovie Smith has been preaching and how that message hasn't really changed. And I'm curious, having played for him for a few seasons, what the program is like under him in general. You hear the term with some older coaches, especially ones that come from the NFL, like the CEO term, somebody who kind of oversees everything. And I just want you to take me inside those walls and describe how he manages a program and why you think, he still has a lot of those guys believing in him.
Yeah, because Coach Smith, he's a big believer on a player run team. It's run by the locker room. When I was getting up there, junior senior year in age, I really saw it more out of him. Just taking recommendations from guys. How's practice going? Do we need to give you a little more rest on your legs? Just things like that. He's always looking out for the best interest in his players because he knows, if the players aren't happy, then, there's not going to be a good product out on Saturdays. And that's what's most important. But, Coach Smith, he's a really laid-back guy. He doesn't show too much emotion, although I did see him celebrating Saturday. And it brought a smile to my face when I saw him, throw his arms up in the air and start running. Probably the first time. I mean, I was a big-time Bears fan, too. I never saw him do anything like that. So just, seeing stuff like that. As a player, that just shows you what type of coach Coach Smith is, and knowing that he always has your back and, is excited for the team as much as he is for himself.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Lovie Smith interviews over the years as a Bears fan as well, and then working here. And that was the first time that I saw him really get emotional, and his voice was cracking in that post-game interview. And it was wild to see for sure because, like you said, he's such a laid-back guy. Switching gears, Mikey, to your career, because I want to, for non-Illini fans listening or those who aren't as familiar with your background, I want to get your perspective on what was such a roller coaster career at Illinois. For those who don't know, you had 3 season-ending injuries after an All-American freshman year at wide receiver, and you hate to kind of put a ranking on these types of things or designate them in certain, I guess, boxes in your memory, but I'm just curious, was one injury or one of the years any harder on you and on your mentality and your psyche harder than the others, or were they all kind of different for you? I just want to know how you kind of process each one.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. They're hard to, I guess, rank, but the one that took the most mental toll on me was probably my last one, my senior year. And the reason it took a lot out of me mentally was because, for one, I knew I was done, football for good. I've been playing football since I was 5 or 6 years old, since I was in kindergarten. So this is my first fall this year without having to suit up, which has been kind of crazy, honestly. But just that last injury, it hit me hard, but at first I was in shock. I mean, you can talk to my roommate, Nick Allegretti, who's now balling out for the Chiefs, so proud of him. But it was, at first I seemed like the normal me, you wouldn't think I just got injured for the 4th time and ended my career. But now, it started to hit me later in the season, and then it's been a little difficult this fall. Just dealing with watching the games and not having a game to suit up for myself.
And just with how these injuries occurred, I remember, I think a few of them, if not all, were kind of non-contact. I could be wrong. Correct me on that if I'm wrong. But do you think, looking back now that you kind of stepped away from the game a little bit, do you think things could have worked out differently? Or do you think, just with the nature of these injuries, that this might have happened to you regardless of the timing or the plays? Just how do you think your body reacted to the game?
Yeah, the football, it's a violent game. If you talk to someone who knew nothing about football and you explain the game to them, they would think anybody that plays football is crazy. Because, you have grown men running at you full speed, just trying to take your head off, to put it in a way that someone would understand it. So it's pretty crazy, but that's what you sign up for. Going into it, the risks that come with it. But after my first injury, I was all, super sad about it. But then I really found a strong faith in God and just knew that, there was a reason he was keeping me out of the game. You never know what could have happened had I played one more down. If I wouldn't have gotten hurt, if I would have just kept going and not gotten hurt that play, who knows, the next play I could have, broke my neck or something or been paralyzed, something along those lines. So, looking back at it, I have no regrets on my career, and, I'm super thankful for all the memories I was able to build and Yeah, there's some what ifs that will pop into my mind every now and then, but it's life. You got to move on. You only got one life, and then there's no reason to drag anything on.
A small silver lining I remember from the aftermath of your final injury was a shout out on Scott Van Pelt's SportsCenter show. That is another clip related to you that kind of went viral and took off. What did that mean to you to see that your story and your hard work and your recovery had kind of been recognized at that level?
Yeah, that was unreal. Scott Van Pelt just tweeted me out of nowhere and said sorry about your injuries. Make sure you watch the show tonight. And Scott Van Pelt is the number one for me. I always used to watch his show starting at 11. I used to watch it every single night, and he would always do the one big thing. And that night it was about me. So, it was pretty cool, pretty surreal again. Obviously I wish it would have been for a different reason, but, it was cool to see the national story. And for him to do something like that really means a lot to me.
All right, reflecting on your career, what would you say your favorite moment from your playing days at Illinois? Just if you had to pick one.
Yeah, this is an easy one for me. It was the last week in my freshman year. We were playing Northwestern, and it was Thanksgiving weekend, I believe, because I had 40 family members there. And they all came in from out of town to all come watch us play. And first off, we won the game, went to a bowl game, which was awesome. But the one play I scored in the south end zone, just a 20-yard route, and my whole family was sitting in that end zone. So I just turned around and looked at all of them. And it, just thinking about it now, puts that picture right in my mind, I'm there again. So that is something, I'll never forget.
All right, before I let you go, Mikey, I want to talk a little bit about what post-football life is like for you now. So just out of curiosity, are you a fan of the game? Do you watch a lot of college football, a lot of NFL? How are you kind of consuming the sport now that you're not playing it anymore?
Yeah, I am a football nut. I don't think I'll ever let it go in terms of not watching it or any of that. I watch football, Saturdays I watch all day. Sundays I watch the NFL all day. It's almost like an addiction that, I can't stop, but I love it. It allows me to feel a part of the game, even though I'm not on a team anymore. At first it was a little bit tough, after I got injured, but now I'm starting to, really get over all that and become a fan of the game.
Who are some wide receivers you admire, either when you played against them or guys you see in the Big Ten now that are doing their thing?
That's tough to say because in terms of Big Ten, I don't really watch many teams outside of Illinois. But I know in the NFL, any of those slot receivers, Julian Edelman, who just is fearless out there going over the middle because, if you haven't done it before, you don't understand, what it takes to do something like that. So just seeing him go out there week in and week out and, go right over the middle and take a hit and just keep going, keep on going. To me, that was someone I definitely looked up to while I was playing and continue to do so now.
All right, you said you still got a hunger for the game. I know you're in the business world now, but is there any other career aspirations to get back into the sport, or do you want to continue, kind of the path you're on in the corporate sector?
I think I'll always be, in the corporate sector, just, putting my business degree to use. But in terms of football, I coached a 7-on-7 high school team last year, and I'm going to do so again this year. And then I played on a flag football team a little bit last year, but it just wasn't the same for me, so I don't think I'm going to do that again. But I'll always be around the game. I would love to start a broadcasting career as well, or do something like you, where you got your podcast going, which is awesome. Just to talk about the game and be around the game, because it was a part of my life for so long that it's something I'll never let go of.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's it's kind of, I never played football, but playing high school sports, it definitely for me is selfishly a way to kind of stay connected. So I definitely feel you on that. Out of curiosity, what are some hobbies you have outside of watching football and coaching 7-on-7? You got any like Netflix shows, Hulu shows, video games? What's going on hobby wise?
Yeah, so I work out every now and then. Nothing like I used to in college, but I like to work out, if that's even considered a hobby. Just to let my mind free. I play pickup basketball. I'm not that good at basketball, but I play because it's a good workout and it's fun to be competitive again. And then video games. I'm sure you've heard of Fortnite. I still play that every now and then with a bunch of my friends from school and my older brother. Just to get connected. It brought a lot of us back together from our early childhood. Just talking on the game whenever we have downtime. And then show wise, I'm not sure what station this is on. It's called All American. It's a really good show, and I've binge watched the whole first season, and the second season just came out, so I'm super excited for that.
I've heard of it. I'm not positive off the top of my head which network it's on either, but definitely heard of it. Last question, Mikey, before I let you go. What do you miss most about the U of I campus? Since we're both U of I grads, I feel like we could relate here. So what do you got?
In terms of athletic side, I think just, being around the guys all the time in the locker room. Your memories are made on the field, but your friendships, they're made off the field in the locker room. So I just, miss being around them all the time. And it's like when I go back to school, I always text my roommate, Nick Allegretti, and I'm like, dang, like this is weird without you here. Like, I just feel like something is missing because him and I, we always used to do everything together. So definitely that. And then, believe it or not, I do kind of miss school a little bit. That might bring shock to some viewers, but, with football being so stressful all the time, or not all the time, but, it's a stressful to be a student athlete. School allowed me to kind of escape that and just zone in on that. So that's definitely what I miss.
I thought you were going to say DP Dough or something like that.
Oh, no, I was a big Jets pizza guy. I know I'll probably catch some backlash for that, but I thought their thin crust pizza was really good.
No, Jets was good. And were you at West Quad when you lived down there? Where were you? Because I thought a lot of the football guys were kind of around that Jets pizza neighborhood.
Yeah, no, I was in a Healy place. It's a new place.
Yeah,
it's on First and Green, right above the hub. So I lived there my last 2.5 years.
Yeah, I know exactly where that is, and it's strange because I'm a little surprised that not you in particular that you miss classes, but I look back and I don't miss the schoolwork at all. I miss the campus lifestyle, but just I do not miss having homework at all.
Yeah, no, I mean homework. No, I was not a big homework guy, but just going to school and able to clear my mind and focus on something other than football, which seems to just take over our lives when that's what you do, 10 hours a day. So that's why I enjoy going to class.
No, yeah, it definitely makes sense. And Mikey, I appreciate you giving me some time, filling us in on what you're up to, filling us in on your experience from a historic win this past Saturday, and letting us in and behind the curtain a little bit about your journey in Illinois. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Alex.
All right, thanks once again to Mikey for joining me. Really appreciate him taking some time and being eager to do so. And I always appreciate when somebody has gone through a really tough endeavor with injuries and what can be not only physically damaging but emotionally damaging, comes out and has no issue with talking about those struggles. It's always appreciated when an athlete is willing to come on this show and do that, for sure. So shout out once again to him, and we'll move it along now to our Stat Head segment with BTN researcher Harold Shelton. And I explained at the top of the show, weekly segment with Harold, a lot of numbers, a lot of breakdowns of Big Ten football, the games that just happened and the games that lie ahead. And at risk of over-explaining, I'll toss it over to Harold and let him take it from here. It's the Stat Head segment with Harold Shelton, and it starts right now. right, we're back in the studio. Myself, Alex Roux, alongside BTN researcher Harold Shelton. H, what's good, man? How are you?
Good, man. We've kind of hit the dog days. We got 8 games coming up this week, but November's right around the corner.
Soon, that Venn diagram of hoops is going to start to overlap. We'll talk basketball on here as well. But first, we got plenty of football to talk. Like you said, busy weekend coming up and a historic weekend to recap as a result that we didn't even really think was possible. Talking last week happened at Illinois with the Illini upsetting number 6 undefeated Wisconsin. I kind of brushed over it last weekend. I was like, we expect Wisconsin to take care of business. I'm not even going to put it in the outline for what we're going to talk about. So that's on me. For you, how surprising was this result, and where does it stack up among upsets that you've seen during your time working around in college football?
So I would say, for one, shame on you for not, seeing this happen. I mean, of course you thought Illinois was going to beat, undefeated.
I'll get to my point of view in a second on it. I got some thoughts.
I thought that Wisconsin would kind of have a sleepwalkish kind of game, a couple years ago when Illinois played them at home. I think Wisconsin only won 24-10. It was really an ugly kind of game. I kind of thought that, Wisconsin would have a similar type game, but I thought they'd win the game. Like, I didn't think Illinois would find a way to do it, but, kudos to them. The fact that Wisconsin was a 30.5-point favorite and lost, for a little reference, that's the second biggest Big Ten upset in the last 35, 40 years. I think 1982, Minnesota was a 32-point favorite and lost at Northwestern. So you're talking, one of the biggest ones in Big Ten play for sure. And obviously the upset of the college football season. I mean, Michigan, App State, was a similar type of where did this come from kind of upset. It's only been 5 times since 2000 where you've had, a team with a losing record, in conference play beat a top 10 team, minimum 6 games played. So, this was one for the record books for sure.
Yeah, we'll talk about what it means for Wisconsin as they now have a much tougher test against Ohio State looming. But just as somebody who, is a close observer of the Illinois football program, just having grown up around there, gone to a lot of games, and kind of understanding the history and the ebbs and flows of that program, this was a legitimately shocking result. Under no circumstance did I expect Illinois to beat this Wisconsin team. Like you said, this is a Wisconsin team that hadn't allowed a first-half touchdown until Illinois did it. They hadn't trailed until Illinois, I guess, technically led at the very last second of that game. And, after they dominated by shutting out 4 of their first 6 opponents, and you see what Illinois had done outside of maybe the second half against Michigan last week, you think no chance, right? You think there's no way with an Illinois team that had been unable to stop the run all year. I mean, they gave up almost 700 yards in Nebraska with Jonathan Taylor coming in there, that they would, maybe make it a game, but certainly not win and then have the game play out the way it did. And I think the craziest thing about it was, it wasn't really a fluke. You watch that game, and Illinois did cause turnovers, but they weren't particularly lucky. They had, I think, 2 touchdowns called back. They missed a field goal. They did not have just some wild confluence of events go their way. They made it happen. They controlled the line of scrimmage after that first drive. They held Jonathan Taylor in check. They caused timely turnovers, and they got it done. Then Brandon Peters made a huge throw. There were some big catches, a couple of big runs by Reggie Corbin and Dre Brown late in the game, and then the kicker, James McCourt, stepped up and put it through at a time when, looking back at the history of Illinois football and kind of the unfortunate events that have happened to them over the years, I thought, this would be fitting if you were to miss this and just send, that program into an even deeper spiral. But they did it. It puts kind of the Lovie Smith era in a whole new light, I think. I think the fan base has, maybe not done a complete 180, but has recognized that this is something that they can work with going forward with him. And I don't know, it's just shocking. I can't. I'm still surprised that it happened. It's exciting for that fan base, and Now we'll see if they can build on it, and we can talk a little bit later about the Illinois-Purdue game coming up and the bowl implications. But I just felt like, with a historic upset, I wanted to frame that a little bit with just how historic the game was. So, we get your Michigan State perspective sometimes on here. We haven't really got many opportunities to give the Illinois perspective. So there it is. And, I don't know if any final thoughts on for a numbers guy like yourself, like I said, maybe once every 10 years, once every 20 years event.
It's funny, if you look at the box, you wonder how Illinois won the game. They got outgained by 105 yards. They went 2 for 10 on third down. They had the ball for 19 minutes.
Didn't run a play in the red zone.
It just when you look at it, you're just wondering how on earth did they pull it off. But
it's like an Iowa game almost.
Right.
Like Iowa does that all the time.
But 3 turnovers, like you said, 2 in the fourth quarter. I was really, really surprised to see the run defense play as well as it has, considering they gave up, 295 to Michigan, over 300 to Minnesota and Nebraska just on the ground alone. So I was surprised to see that. Seems like they changed it up a little bit, brought safeties up a little more instead of just staying back in the normal Tampa 2 that Lovie likes to run. It was good to see the adjustments be made, and, they got, big performances from a lot of the transfers. The Michigan quarterback and the, USC receiver. And,
sure.
Between that and Milo Eifler from Washington, I mean, that might be the way going forward. Just, get some more of these high-impact transfer guys and, they see if they're having success at Illinois, maybe more of them start to look that way.
Yep, and we'll move on from that game for now and talk implications of it. Looking ahead to this weekend, and like we said, this weekend's packed, so let's touch on one more game before we move on from last Saturday. The Penn State-Michigan game. That was a top 20 game, whiteout game at Beaver Stadium, all the pomp and circumstance surrounding that, and it ended in a way that you kind of hate to see with the ball being dropped in the end zone, and it was Ronnie Bell, right, who dropped it. Yeah, Ronnie. I mean, you just hate to see somebody getting emotional over it on the sidelines, and obviously it's a high-intensity, high-pressure situation. Penn State comes away with it. Their hopes in the East are still alive. Michigan, barring some unforeseen circumstance, probably out of that race, considering what Ohio State did to Northwestern on Friday night. So what did you see out of that game that maybe makes you think Penn State can keep this rolling? They'll have Minnesota coming up soon. They have Michigan State before that this weekend. And eventually Ohio State. Do you think everything's rolling along as scheduled, as James Franklin would like to see, or did they show some cracks in that game that might leave you concerned if they want to take that leap?
So after the Iowa game, I was more all in on Penn State. For a while they've had trouble running the ball against really good teams. Everything was feast or famine, and they get a big run, but when they need to get 2 yards, they couldn't get 2 yards. The Iowa game, Noah Cain runs it, 22 times, gets over 100 yards. They basically run the clock out in the second half on Iowa. That was not the case this past weekend. The defense was on the field too long because the offense could not sustain a drive. Obviously, the big plays were there. KJ Hamler, had a field day against that secondary, but when they needed to sustain a drive and rest that defense, those conversions were few and far between. They had a lot of issues on third down. They had issues running the ball. Despite having all of that talent in the backfield, Sean Clifford had 6 more carries than anybody else on the team. I think that's a little concerning. Second straight game that they've been under 300 yards. Now, the fact that they were able to win both of them obviously is a good sign. But for an explosive offense like this to be held under 300 yards, I think it's a little concerning to happen twice in a row.
All right, so before we even talk about Ohio State, Wisconsin, let's just keep on the Penn State track, and I want to know your thoughts about them going to East Lansing and taking on the Spartans, because Michigan State, unranked, not looking like one of their better years under D'Antonio. You think Spartans can give them a game just based off what you just said?
It's an absolute trap game for Penn State, more so of the situation in general, just the fact that they've played, 2 physical ranked opponents at night. Now they have to get back up for another game. Michigan State's kind of had their number. Each of the last 2 years, they've beaten Penn State when Penn State was in the top 10, including last year when Michigan State was unranked. Michigan State's coming off a bye, a chance to get healthy, maybe recalibrate after the Ohio State and Wisconsin losses. So I think it's a really tough spot for Penn State. I'm not saying that they'll lose the game, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
Michigan State's giving them all kinds of trouble.
Oh, yeah. Won 5 of the last 6.
Yeah.
Last year, Penn State absolutely should have won the game, but, Felton Davis made a play late. 2 years ago when they played in the rain, it was a 3.5-hour delay in East Lansing. Lewerke throws for 400 yards. They kicked the field goal at the end. So, we've seen Michigan State kind of derail some Penn State seasons in the past. It would be wise for Penn State to not overlook this game.
Yeah, and kind of touched on it in previous episodes, but this is kind of the time of year where the national picture forgets about Penn State a little bit because they stumble. Whether it's against Ohio State in a heartbreaker or they let that carry over to the Michigan State game, which they've done the last couple of years. So they got to get out ahead of this. They can't let Michigan State derail their season again. They got to obviously stay undefeated as long as possible, but win this one, then you got Minnesota next.
And at least they have a bye in between,
exactly,
too. So
week off, Minnesota, and then Ohio State. So it'll be interesting to see if they can, keep building hype where it's kind of fizzled out in the last couple of years. Let's talk Ohio State, Wisconsin, just because, we can get to Notre Dame, Michigan a little bit and some of the other games, but this was the game that everyone's looking forward to. I do think that Wisconsin came out conservatively against Illinois, and maybe not took them lightly, but did not come out firing on all cylinders because it was Illinois and because you had Ohio State to plan for next week, and I think that's just human nature. So now the game is watered down a little bit, the hype at least, but it's still a huge game, and Ohio State and Wisconsin both have a ton to play for. Do you think there's going to be a hangover at all for the Badgers, and do you think it's going to matter against an Ohio State team that's looked invincible so far?
Yeah, I keep waiting for Ohio State to have that letdown, kind of similar to what Wisconsin did last week. Kind of figure, hey, potential trap game, playing Friday night, Northwestern's wounded, they played them tough in the past, and, they blow right through them. Oh, Michigan State, really good defense, have a chance to play tough, blow right through them. This Ohio State team's one of the best I've seen since I've been here. They don't really seem to have a weakness. At least I haven't seen one so far. Maybe Wisconsin does some things on Saturday to change my mind, but I haven't seen it yet. They seem to be the most complete team in America, if you ask me. So even if Wisconsin was undefeated, I still think it's a bad matchup for them. I think Wisconsin needs to find a way to confuse Justin Fields, put some pressure on him, give him some looks that he hasn't seen. I do think he holds on to the ball too long at times and can take some sacks unnecessarily. And so I think that's Wisconsin's only way to stop them on offense. And if they get behind early, then the game plan has to go out of the window where they can't control the clock and Jonathan Taylor has issues and, they're in third and long all day and becomes a pass rush drill. I think that's a really, really big problem.
Yeah, they're so well-rounded, the Buckeyes are. I mean, like you said, not really a weakness. Last year, the balance was just thrown off with the defense struggling.
And they couldn't run the ball.
And they couldn't run the ball, and that's been fixed. But, and Dobbins is looking amazing. Master Teague will probably start for most other teams.
He's fifth in the conference in rushing.
Right.
He's a backup.
Right, and the receiver core is just ridiculously deep and talented. Like you said, it's a very complete team. I saw them up close Friday night in Evanston. Went to that game, and like you said, maybe he was expecting Northwestern to put up a fight. They tend to muddy the waters and drag teams into the mud with them, but it was just the second quarter. Like we've talked about with Ohio State, they blow your doors off. It's crazy. I mean, it was like 7-3 or something.
Yeah, 10-3 going in second quarter, and then it's
I actually went back into their office to do a little bit of work, and that's when Ohio State kind of took off on them. So I walked outside, and I'm like, what's going on? And it's 28-3 or whatever. So they did it again, and I imagine Wisconsin will be pissed off going into this game because of what happened. They were obviously embarrassed on the national stage, but I just don't know, like you said, that it's going to matter. So we'll see. And we'll move it along now to the team up north from Ohio State's perspective, Michigan. Just because this is one of those weird weeks where a marquee game pops up that's out of conference. Notre Dame visited Northwestern around this time last year. This time they're visiting Michigan. obviously going to be a huge, national story, a national game, and that always happens when these two teams match up. I've only seen Notre Dame play once or twice this year. I watched the Louisville game where they looked kind of shaky in their opener. Haven't seen much of them since. I know the USC game was kind of close.
Yep.
What do you expect with them going into a very hostile environment? And with Michigan now, some of their goals, their highest goals fading a little bit, how do you expect them to welcome Notre Dame? I guess I'd respond to that.
Yeah, see, I want to see if there's any carryover from the last 35 minutes or so from the Penn State game where they completely outplayed Penn State. If Ronnie Bell catches that touchdown that we talked about earlier, I think there's a really good chance they win that game in overtime. But, unfortunately for Michigan fans and that program, they just haven't found a way to kind of get that big win to kind of give them some juice going forward.
Right.
That's probably the best they've looked all year against a quality opponent, though, so I'm curious to see if it carries over. The good news is, they can't dwell on all of the missed opportunities because of this game. It's a top 10 match, a top 10 opponent. It's a rivalry game. Try to get a little payback from last year. So it might be a blessing in disguise that this game is coming up because they don't have time to dwell on all of the missed opportunities. Even though, the Big Ten race is probably over for them, like you said, this is still a chance to kind of build some momentum. You got 3 rivals in your last 5 games. If you still want to make a statement on the year, it could start on Saturday.
What do you think has hurt them the most? Shea hasn't looked right to me. I think they lost more than they expected when Higdon moved on. I think Charbonnet's good, but the running game, just from my uninformed perspective, has not looked as strong as it did last year. What do you think has them struggling the most as they fail to kind of close out these games?
I feel like they still don't really know what they are offensively. Last year, even though they made the change with Gaddis and all that, they still averaged 35 points a game. Patterson seemed a lot more confident. He would get the ball out early. It wasn't one of those overthinking kind of things as we've seen him do in the past. Like in the Illinois game, it looked like he didn't even want to throw the ball downfield. Penn State game, you seemed a lot more confident, a lot more sure and precise in terms of where he wanted the ball to go. He was actually running out of the pocket, making plays. I'd be curious to see if he could do that again. Again, it's all about carryover for them. There's been a lot of talk about how people feel a lot better about Michigan based off of what they saw, in the second half on Saturday. But it means nothing if they lose again to Notre Dame this week. So I'm just curious to see if there's any carryover. To your point, they've had issues running the ball. I think the offensive line's been a disappointment considering that most people thought it would be the best O-line in the conference. They can't run it when they want to. The big plays haven't been there in the run game. And, they've got these 3 receivers that, everybody talks about, and Ronnie Bell's been the best one, and he wasn't one of the guys that they talked about before the season. So I just think, they don't really know what they want to be. They don't take enough shots downfield, and we kind of thought that would be the case since that was supposed to be the strength of the team. We're pretty much close to November. Kind of are who you are at this point, I think.
All right, well, that'll be a big one, like we said, and definitely be watching 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern on Saturday night. Taking it to the Big Ten West now, and the 2 teams that were the happiest outside of Illinois was Iowa and Minnesota. Their fans had to be thrilled with Illinois taking care of Wisconsin and really tightening that Big Ten West race. Minnesota controls their own destiny now. Iowa, still has a shot at both teams. Do you expect them to struggle this weekend at all? Iowa's going to Northwestern, and Minnesota's got Maryland as another team that's been struggling. So I've learned my lesson not to overlook any game after last week. Do you think either of those teams struggle, or do you think they keep it moving and keep the 3-team race kind of going strong?
So it's interesting. Iowa's lost 3 straight to Northwestern. They've all been really close games. To your point earlier where they like to muddy the waters and take people in with them, this seems like that type of game this week. Iowa's really struggled to move the ball. I wouldn't be shocked if that was a 17-10-ish type of game.
Iowa hasn't scored a touchdown in 2 weeks or something. Isn't it something like that?
They had they've had 3 offensive touchdowns the last 3 weeks.
Okay.
And 2 of them came against Purdue. One of them was a short field after they recovered an onside kick. So, I mean, they've had trouble really sustaining.
It was the week before
drives.
this one. They were really anemic, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, that Purdue defense is nothing to write home about. So the fact that they, have struggled to run the ball, Nate Stanley's only had 1 touchdown pass the last 3 weeks, I think it's a little disappointing from a 3-year starter at quarterback there. So I think they need to be careful, not overlook Northwestern this week. Northwestern obviously puts a lot into that game. There's a lot of history there. Pat Fitzgerald, taking that Iowa game very personally. Mm-hmm. So I expect Northwestern to play their best game of the year. Whether that's enough to win the game remains to be seen. And as for Minnesota, I mean, they're rolling along. They're 7-0. Potential for Josh Jackson to return this week. Anthony McFarland's supposed to be good to go after missing last week. He's been battling a high ankle sprain. Maryland they blew the doors off of Minnesota last year. They went into Minneapolis 2 years ago with a third-string quarterback and won. Mm-hmm. So it'd be wise for Minnesota not to overlook the Terps. I know, there's all the talk of 8-0 and the bye and Penn State coming up, but I think if they just continue to take care of their business, they could do some good things. And shout out to PJ Fleck for after the game against Rutgers saying, we're 1-0 in the Rutgers Championship Series. And kind of doing the same thing again.
Coach speak, man.
Trying to get to 1-0 in the Maryland Championship Series. So he's got the tunnel vision. It's up to the players to do the same.
Yeah, for all the eye-rolling coach speak, and Fleck is, near the top of the leaderboard in that category. Got to give him a shout-out for following through with his scholarship to Casey O'Brien, who's on the team, the holder.
Awesome story.
4-time cancer survivor. Got in for a hold, and, it was a moving moment that took off, went viral, and rightfully so. It's one of those things. It's you see him being showcased at the Media Day luncheon, and, his story kind of gained steam, and then it's good to see him get that moment actually on the field. It's crazy story. And, for the dude to have gone through what he did, he does not look like he's been through, the ringer like that. Like he's looks like a football player. He's beefed up, swole up. And when I met him over the summer at their practice, he was much bigger than me. I did not expect that. He's a legit D1 football player. So cool to see that. All right, before we wrap up, a couple games with bowl implications that I want to touch on. Indiana's in good shape. They go to Nebraska, to a Nebraska program and situation there that is, a little in flux right now. Mo Washington's off the team from what I heard out of Scott Frost this week. And Indiana, like I said, is kind of chugging along here at a good pace. What do you think is going to happen there? And do you think both of those teams still have a good chance to make a bowl? Because Nebraska is at 4 wins, but, with the way they've been going with the injuries and everything, it's kind of uncertain.
The injuries are a huge thing in this. We don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be for either team.
Right.
Michael Penix left the game early last week. He's questionable. Obviously, Martinez missed the Minnesota game, but he's been off for 2 weeks now since they were off last week, so he might be ready to go. Nebraska better hope he is. He's a big step up from Noah Vedral.
I saw fans calling for Vedral, when Martinez was struggling earlier this year, and it's one of those
backup quarterback's always the most popular guy.
It's Adrian Martinez we're talking about here.
Exactly.
So.
I think Indiana's much more equipped if it becomes a backup QB situation. Peyton Ramsey, bailed out the Hoosiers last week against the Terps. He's got a ton of experience. And just how about the fact that Indiana's favored in this game? If you would have told me that in August, that, Big Ten West favorite Nebraska would be a home underdog against Indiana, I wouldn't have believed you, and I don't think anybody would have. But, I think it just goes to show, how both seasons have gone. The fact that Indiana, is off to their best start since 2007. And Nebraska is still kind of struggling, trying to figure out what they want to be and who they want to be. This kind of goes to show how both seasons have gone. But I will say, if Nebraska wins this game and Wisconsin loses, it becomes a 4-team race in that West going into November. And I think it gets very interesting.
All right. We started with Illinois. We'll end with their matchup at Purdue. A game that's made, Merritt's become pretty significant just with the Illini now having some bowl hopes resurface, and with Purdue, kind of needing this one if they want to go bowling. So it's kind of the play-in game for a potential bowl run. That's how I'm looking at it. And I'd argue that the game in the grand scheme of things is a little bigger for the Illini just because Jeff Brom is firmly cemented at Purdue. He's building this thing. He has the injury excuse this year, rightfully so, with Rondale Moore and Elijah Sindelar being out. And, Illinois, they look like this could be a season that's going off the rails a couple weeks ago. Credit to the players for not quitting, for actually playing harder and responding in a way that, maybe not every team would. And now, bowl game is very realistic because they have Rutgers the following week and a very winnable crossover game, maybe against Michigan State. You never know. The last time they played, they won. That was an eternity ago. And then, games against Iowa and Northwestern remaining. So the path is there. What do you think is going to happen in West Lafayette? Kind of contrasting styles. Purdue is not anyway similar to Wisconsin in terms of style of play. And do you think this game will have some added sizzle with, like I said, maybe a postseason path on the line?
I definitely think there's more interest in the game than there was a week ago. Like you said, completely different styles. I want to see, how Illinois responds. For one, everybody telling them how great they are, all the pats on the back. Oh, we beat Wisconsin, whatever.
Right.
Now they play Purdue. Will they kind of go in there sleepwalking, thinking that, they're on top of the world?
Right.
Do they get a dose of humble pie or not? We'll see. But the styles are completely different. Purdue doesn't even want to run the football. They want to throw it all over the place, and their future is really bright with David Bell and Milton Wright and Jack Plummer. So I think Purdue probably wins the game, unfortunately for you. Obviously, I could be wrong. But I kind of like Purdue in this matchup. I'll be curious to see, though, if Illinois, just kind of their mentality in general, see how they come out and play. Because you're right. I think it's a much bigger game for them than it is for Purdue. For Lovie Smith and just, kind of the year 3, year 4 for him to kind of move forward. The time is now. The schedule's there. Got to win. Got to put multiple good performances together.
Yeah, Lovie Smith has alluded to it multiple times this week, just kind of his victory lap media tour that Purdue embarrassed them last year.
Right.
Big time. It was 46-7.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see, clearly if they can fix whatever mismatch that cost them dearly last year. And, we'll see also Purdue can kind of continue this development. Not a blessing in disguise necessarily, but an opportunity for guys like Plummer and Bell to shine while the other guys are out. So a lot of good stuff, H. We went a while today, rightfully so. Huge weekend and huge weekend awaits. We'll plenty to talk about next weekend, reflecting, because the weekend after that is not great. So
we got 4 games, not a ton of great ones.
Right.
So we had to empty the bucket this week.
We'll look in the rearview mirror next week, and hopefully we have a lot to talk about. So we will see you about the same time, about the same place. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Thanks once again to Harold and Mikey for joining me. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate their perspective on a pretty crazy weekend in the Big Ten, and especially down in Illinois. A win that, was a once-in-a-decade thing for them, at least in recent history, and a once-in-4-decade occurrence for the Big Ten. So hopefully we're able to frame it in a way on this show that reflects that historic occurrence. So thanks to those guys. Thanks to my producer, Julie Bronder, as always, for stitching the show together. Appreciate everyone out there who's tuning in as well. And don't forget, if you're listening now and just streaming it on SoundCloud or wherever, you can also subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Podbean, and YouTube. On the Big Ten Network YouTube channel, there's a Take 10 podcast playlist. So find us on any of those locations and leave us a review or rating if you enjoy the show. And we will talk to you next week here on the Take 10 podcast.